Once upon a time, in the rolling red clay hills of southwest Georgia, where the Chattahoochee River carves lazy bends through the landscape not far away, there existed a quiet stretch of land in Early County near the sleepy town of Bluffton. This place, now known as White Oak Pastures, has held the heartbeat of the Harris family since 1866, mere months after the last. Echoes of cannon fire from the American Civil War had faded into uneasy silence. It began with Captain James Edward Harris, a Confederate cavalry officer whose uniform still carried the dust of battlefields when he first rode into this corner of the world. The war had stripped him of his original farm some 50 miles distant, swallowed by the chaos of defeat and reconstruction. Yet, with the stubborn resilience of a man who had stared down worse, he accepted help from an uncle, a medical doctor already settled in Bluffton, and claimed this new tract of earth. Picture him arriving at dawn, the sun rising slow and heavy over flat horizons, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold that reflected off dew-soaked grasses. His horse's hooves sank slightly into the soft, iron-rich red clay. That signature Georgia soil, deep crimson when dry and baked under the sun, turning to sticky, rust-colored mud after summer thunderstorms. The air carried the sharp, mineral scent of wet earth, mixed with pine resin from scattered longleaf pines standing sentinel along fence lines. Captain Harris built a modest homestead of weathered pine boards, its tin roof popping and creaking as it cooled in the evening. He set to work in the old way, the way most southern farmers knew before machines and chemicals promised shortcuts. The farm pulsed with diversity, rows of cotton swaying white in the breeze like fresh snow, peanuts pushing their way up through the soil with their earthy, nutty aroma when the pods were pulled fresh, and vegetable patches bursting with okra, tomatoes, and collards whose leaves carried the faint bitterness of Georgia's summers. Livestock roamed freely, cows lowing in deep, resonant tones as they grazed, pigs rooting noisily through underbrush with grunts and snuffles, chickens clucking and scratching in dusty yards where the scent of fresh droppings mingled with sun-warmed feathers. Every Saturday, the rhythm of harvest filled the air. A cow and several pigs met their end with quiet respect, the metallic tongue of blood briefly sharp, before it dissipated into the larger symphony of farm smells. Wood smoke from curing fires, the sweet ferment of hay stacked in barns, the clean musk of animal hides. Meat was portioned, wrapped, and loaded onto mule-drawn wagons whose wooden wheels groaned over rutted dirt roads. The 3-mile journey to Bluffton unfolded under a canopy of live oaks draped in Spanish moss, their leaves whispering in the wind like secrets. In town, the bounty supplied for general stores whose shelves smelled of tobacco, leather, and spices. A hotel where frying bacon and coffee greeted guests at dawn, and a boarding house whose kitchen windows steamed with the aroma of slow-cooked stews. This was farming as intimate partnership with the land. The red clay, fertile yet fragile, prone to gullies, if left bare, was nourished by rotation, by the natural cycle of animals fertilizing pastures, by the way roots held soil against torrential rains that could turn fields into rivers of rust. The sounds were alive, the distant lowing of cattle at dusk, the sharp calls of guinea fowl scattering like feathered alarms, the steady crunch of hooves on dry grass, the evening chorus of crickets and frogs rising from nearby wetlands. Captain Harris passed the land to his son, Will Carter Harris, who carried the tradition into the early 20th century. By then, the farm had expanded, harvesting cows and pigs every morning 6 days a week. Wagons still rolled, but now with greater volume. The smells intensified, more manure steaming in piles to be spread, more smoke from larger smokehouses, more life pulsing through the acres. The farm remained the beating heart of Bluffton, feeding not just bodies but bonds between families. Then came the third generation, Will Bell Harris, father to the man at the center of our tale. World War II ended, and with peace came a flood of new promises. Tractors replaced mules, their diesel engines rumbling like distant thunder across fields. Synthetic fertilizers born from the same chemistry that fueled bombs arrived in bags, that smelled faintly of ammonia. Pesticides left a sharp, chemical bite in the air after spraying. Antibiotics and hormones became routine, injected or fed in grain mixes that carried the sweet corn scent of feedlots. Will Bell embraced it all. The farm shifted from polyculture to specialization, a cow-calf operation focused on beef. Diverse animals and crops faded. Burmadagrous monoculture dominated the pastures, its coarse blades greening under chemical coaxing. Calves received implants for faster growth, their feed heavy with corn and soy, whose dusty sweetness hung in barn air. The goal became clear and cold: maximum pounds of beef at minimum cost. Efficiency hummed in the background the whine of machinery, the metallic clank of gates, the low drone of ventilation fans in new sheds. Into this world came Will Harris, born and raised on the very soil his great-grandfather had claimed. As a boy, he felt the red clay between bare toes, warm and powdery in summer, cool and slick after rain. He woke to roosters crowing before first light, the air thick with dew and the faint, musky odor of sleeping cattle. He helped his father. The leather creak of saddles, the warm breath of horses against his neck, the satisfying thud of fence posts driven deep. The farm was his entire universe, its sights of endless green under vast blue skies. Its sounds of wind through pines and distant train whistles. Its smells of fresh-cut hay, manure baking in the sun, and wood smoke from evening fires. For education, Will traveled to the University of Georgia in Athens, majoring in animal science. Classrooms smelled of chalk dust and lab chemicals. Lectures extolled feedlot science, hormone protocols, antibiotic wonders. It felt like progress, modern, scientific, necessary. He graduated in 1976, diploma in hand, full of certainty. His father enforced the family rule: gain experience elsewhere first. Will joined Gold Kist, a poultry giant, where the air inside massive barns was thick with feathers, feed dust, and the constant rustle of thousands of birds. He learned scale, efficiency, the industrial heartbeat, but home called. By the late 1970s, he returned to Bluffton, to White Oak Pastures, to work side by side with his father. Together they ran a conventional cattle farm. Cow-calf pairs dotted the pastures. Calves were sold or finished elsewhere on grain. Hormones ensured rapid gains. Antibiotics prevented outbreaks in crowded conditions. The Burmadagrous stretched uniform and green, maintained by sprays whose faint chemical residue lingered after application. Will measured success in weight tickets, market reports, cost sheets. He was proud aggressive even with inputs. If instructions said 1 unit, he might double it for certainty. Mornings found him on horseback, coffee steaming in his hand, the sun warming his back as cattle lowed in greeting. Evenings brought family dinners in the farmhouse, the scent of Yvonne's cooking mingling with the day's lingering earth and sweat. Life felt steady. Will and Yvonne raised 3 daughters: Jessie, Jenny, Jody, and the family home on the property. The girls grew up amid the same sensory tapestry, the tickle of grass on legs, the earthy smell after rain, the comforting rumble of trucks hauling feed. Yet, beneath it all, faint dissonances crept in. The red clay began showing where compacted in places, gullies carving after storms. Its once vibrant hue dulled by dependency on purchased fertility. Grass required more fertilizer each year. Weeds adapted, demanding stronger chemicals whose sharp odor stung the nose. Animals grew fast, but seemed less hardy, needing constant intervention. The farm produced, but it extracted rather than renewed. The air sometimes carried a faint sterility instead of rich life. Will often recalled his grandfather's words: "If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten." In youth, it spurred innovation within the system. But as the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, nearing his 40th year, the words shifted meaning. Questions stirred quietly. Was this honoring the land Captain Harris had loved? Was the soil deeper, richer, or shallower under his watch? Was the air cleaner, the water clearer? No thunderclap moment arrived. Instead, a slow awakening, the sight of eroded earth after rain. The rising cost of inputs, the unnatural confinement of animals compared to ancestral herds roaming free. Nature, he would later say, abhors a monoculture, and the farm had become one. By the mid-1990s, Will Harris stood at a threshold. The fourth-generation cattleman felt the pull of something ancient beneath his boots, the red clay whispering of cycles long ignored. The story of White Oak Pastures was far from finished. Its deepest, most redemptive chapter was stirring, ready to unfold under the same Georgia sun that had witnessed every generation before. The mid-1990s arrived like a slow, humid Georgia summer, thick with heat, heavy with unspoken tension. Will Harris was nearing 40, a milestone that often brings reflection, especially when a man has spent his entire life tied to the same red clay soil. He still rose before dawn each day, the sky a bruised purple fading to gold. The air cool and damp with dew that clung to his boots like reluctant memories. The familiar sounds greeted him, the low, rumbling lowing of cattle stirring in the distance, the sharp metallic clang of gates as he checked fences, the faint diesel tong from the tractor idling nearby. But something had shifted inside him. The pride he once felt in the farm's efficiency now carried an undercurrent of unease, like the faint chemical aftertaste that lingered in the air long after spraying pesticides. It wasn't a single dramatic event, no lightning strike, no sudden crisis that cracked open his certainty, no burning bush, as he would later joke in interviews. Instead, it was an accumulation of small, nagging observations that refused to be ignored. The red clay, once yielding rich growth under careful hands, now felt harder underfoot, compacted and less forgiving. After heavy rains, gullies snaked across pastures like angry scars, carrying away topsoil in rusty rivulets that stained the creeks downstream. The Burmadagrus, uniform and green from synthetic fertilizers, grew vigorously at first, but required ever-increasing doses to maintain its color. Weeds crept in despite the sprays, their stubborn roots defying the sharp, acrid scent of herbicides that hung in the still air like an unwelcome guest. Will began noticing the animals more keenly. The cattle, implanted with hormones and fed high-grain rations in feedlots, bulked up impressively, weight gains measured in precise pounds per day, but their eyes seemed duller, their movements more mechanical. In confinement, ammonia-laced odor from concentrated manure, a far cry from the clean, earthy musk of open pastures. He remembered stories from his grandfather about herds roaming freely, expressing natural behaviors, grazing selectively, ruminating under shade trees, calves nursing contentedly. Now, the system prioritized speed and volume over vitality. We were producing pounds of beef efficiently, he would later reflect, but at what cost to the land, the animals, and ultimately ourselves? The broader world intruded too. News reports in the 1990s spoke increasingly of environmental concerns: soil erosion, water pollution from agricultural runoff, the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria linked to routine use in livestock feed. We'll read about dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico fed by nutrient overload from Midwest farms, about declining biodiversity in once vibrant ecosystems. Closer to home, he saw rural communities like Bluffton hollowing out, young people leaving for cities, family farms consolidating or failing, the local economy shrinking as commodity agriculture centralized processing and distribution far away. The farm still provided for his family, Yvonne, and their 3 daughters, but the prosperity felt brittle, dependent on volatile input prices and distant markets. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the pastures in long golden shadows, Will stood at the edge of a field, listening to the soft rustle of wind through the grass. The cattle lowed contentedly in the distance, but he felt a deep disquiet. He recalled his grandfather, Will Bell Harris's favorite saying, If you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten. For years, it had meant pushing harder within the industrial model, better genetics, more precise feeding, tighter management. But now it echoed as a warning. What if continuing the same path meant depleting the very land that sustained them? What legacy was he leaving for Jesse, Jenny, and Jody? The first tentative step came around 1995. Will decided to phase out hormone implants and subtherapeutic antibiotics in the cattle feed. It felt revolutionary, almost reckless. The labels on the implants promised faster gains. Without them, animals would grow slower, requiring more time on pasture. Feed costs might rise without the efficiency of grain finishing. He braced for pushback from his father, from neighbors, from the bankers who understood the old math. But he pressed on. The change was incremental at first, watching the herd closely, noting how they adapted. Some days, the pastures seemed livelier. Birds flocked more readily to follow the grazing animals, picking at insects stirred up by hooves. The air felt cleaner in the barns, less heavy with the chemical undertones of medicated feed. Encouraged, he took the next leap, eliminating confinement feeding entirely. No more feedlots, with their dusty, crowded pens and constant low hum of machinery. Instead, he committed to grass-based systems, letting cattle express their natural grazing instincts. The shift brought immediate challenges. Weight gains slowed noticeably. The animals took longer to reach market weight. And the beef carcasses were leaner, less marbled in the way commodity markets rewarded. Revenue dipped. It caused me to make less money, Will later admitted in interviews. Less was okay, but we were still making money. The farm stayed afloat, but the margin narrowed. Nights grew longer with worry. Spreadsheets showed red ink creeping in where black had always prevailed. By 2000, the momentum built. Will stopped using chemical fertilizers altogether. This was the bigger risk. For decades, the pastures had depended on synthetic nitrogen to push Burmadagrous growth. Without it, the grass yellowed initially, growth stunted. Weeds surged in places where fertility once masked competition. Production plummeted, yields dropped sharply in the first years. Money hemorrhaged. Giving up chemical fertilizers caused me to start losing money, he recalled. Chemical fertilizers are good stuff, and it takes a long time to get off them. Creditors called more frequently. Family discussions turned tense. Neighbors whispered that Will had lost his mind, turning his back on proven modern methods for some nostalgic return to the past. Yet he persisted. He began observing nature with new intensity. He noticed how, without constant chemical intervention, certain plants, return clovers fixing nitrogen naturally, depruded perennials improving soil structure. He experimented with rotational grazing, moving herds more frequently to mimic wild migrations. The impact was subtle at first. Manure distributed evenly, trampled into the soil, rather than concentrated in feedlot lagoons. Earthworms appeared in greater numbers, their castings dotting the surface like tiny dark jewels. The soil, once compacted and lifeless in places, began to soften underfoot, spongier after rains instead of running off in muddy torrents. Around the same time, Will introduced poultry into the system. He started with broiler chickens, Freedom Rangers, closer to heritage breeds than the hyper-efficient industrial hybrids. These birds foraged freely, scratching at insects, their droppings enriching the pastures naturally. The air around the mobile coops carried a fresh, feathery scent mixed with the sharp tang of fresh manure, alive, not sterile. The chickens followed the cattle in rotation, sanitizing pastures by eating fly larvae and spreading nutrients. It was the beginning of polyculture, no longer a meat monoculture on a plant monoculture. Each change felt like an act of atonement. Will openly acknowledged his role in the old system. I was part of the problem, he would say in later reflections. I had been an aggressive user of industrial tools. If the label said 1 pint, I'd use a quart just to be sure. The disenchantment grew into determination. He realized the farm had become extractive, pulling fertility from the soil without replenishing it, confining animals in ways that denied their instincts, contributing to a food system that prioritized cheap calories over health, ecology, or community. Financially, the years from 2000 to 2003 were brutal. Losses mounted, debt accumulated. Will mortgaged land, drew on savings, worked longer hours. Yvonne supported quietly, managing the household while he wrestled with doubt. The daughters, still young, sensed the strain but saw their father's resolve. Neighbors' skepticism stung. Will's gone hippie. Some joke, but he tuned it out, focusing on the land's quiet signals of response. By the mid-2000s, signs of recovery emerged. Soil organic matter began climbing slowly at first, then measurably. Pastures greened more resiliently after dry spells. Water infiltration improved, reducing runoff. Animals appeared healthier, brighter eyes, shinier coats. Fewer health issues without routine interventions. The beef, though leaner, developed deeper flavor from grass, finishing rich mineral notes that commodity grain-fed meat lacked. Will expanded further. Sheep and goats joined the rotation, browsing weeds the cattle ignored. Heritage pigs rooted in wooded areas, turning underbrush into fertile ground. Even rabbits and additional poultry species appeared, each adding layers to the ecosystem. The farm transformed into a symphony of species, cattle leading, followed by poultry, then ruminants browsing regrowth. Waste from one became food for another. No external inputs needed beyond sunlight, rain, and time. The emotional toll was real. Will described it as a personal evolution, a road to Damascus without the drama, gradual awakening to unintended consequences. I didn't like what industrial farming was doing to my land, my animals, and my community, he explained in podcasts and interviews. The changes weren't motivated by profit initially, but by ethics, a desire to steward the land as his ancestors had, to allow animals dignity, to rebuild rather than deplete. Through it all, the sensory world of the farm shifted profoundly. Mornings now carried richer scents, the sweet ferment of decomposing manure integrated into soil, the fresh green burst of diverse forages, the lively chatter of birds and insects. Sounds layered, diverse animal calls instead of uniform lowing, the rustle of multiple species moving together. The red clay, once hard and silent, softened and breathed again, alive under his boots. This awakening wasn't complete in 2003. It unfolded over decades. But those early, painful years marked the turning point. Will Harris, once a proud industrial cattleman, had begun the long journey of redemption, not for acclaim, but because the land demanded it, and his conscience could no longer ignore the call. The early 2000s settled over white oak pastures like a thick Georgia fog, humid, persistent, and full of hidden promise beneath the surface. Will Harris had already crossed the initial thresholds of change. Hormones and antibiotics phased out in the late 1990s. Chemical fertilizers abandoned around 2000, and the rigid monoculture of Burmadagrus giving way to rotational grazing that let nature's rhythms take the lead. Yet the farm's transformation felt far from complete. Dawn still broke with the same crimson glow over pine-fringed horizons. But now the air carried a subtle shift, no longer the faint, lingering bite of synthetic ammonia from medicated feeds, but a warmer, earthier musk, as manure from freer-moving animals worked its way naturally into the soil. The red clay underfoot, once packed hard like sun-baked brick and prone to cracking under drought, began to yield slightly with each step, a faint sponginess emerging as organic matter crept upward from near zero to measurable fractions. Financial strain hit hardest in those transitional years. From roughly 2000 to 2003, production dipped sharply as pastures readjusted to life, without synthetic nitrogen boosts. The once uniform green Bermudagrass fields turned patchy yellowing in spots, invaded by opportunistic weeds, like thistles that scratched at ankles and ragweed whose pollen dusted the air with a faint, bitter sweetness. Cattle, now fully grass-fed without grain finishing, gained weight more deliberately. Their ribs showed longer under glossy coats, and market weight arrived weeks or months later. Trucks that once hauled calves to distant feedlots rolled less frequently, leaving quieter lanes and tighter budgets. Revenue from conventional commodity channels evaporated, replaced by uncertainty. Debt piled up, millions mortgaged against family acres that had stood collateral-free for generations. In the farmhouse kitchen at night, under the soft hum of a single overhead bulb and the ceiling fan's lazy whirl, spreadsheets flickered on screens, while outside the distant lowing of unsettled cattle mixed with cricket choruses and the occasional hoot of an owl from the pine woods. Yvonne moved through those days with steady grace, her hands busy with meals that still carried the comforting aroma of slow-cooked collards and cornbread, even as worry etched faint lines around her eyes. The daughters Jessie, Jenny, and Jody felt the undercurrent: quieter dinners, fewer new toys. The way their father's laugh came less readily after another call from the lender. Neighbors in Early County observed from afar, gathering at the feed store or Sunday services where coffee steamed with the scorched earth scent of overbrewed grounds. "We'll lie," Somi muttered, chasing old-timey dreams while the rest of us keep up with progress. Bluffton, already a fading on the map with its handful of souls, felt the ripple empty storefronts, young folks packing for Atlanta, one of the county's biggest operations teetering on the edge. But Will walked the pastures every day, boots sinking deeper into soil that was beginning to breathe. He crumbled dark clods between calloused fingers, feeling the crumbly texture where once it had been dense and lifeless. Earthworms, long absent now, wriggled visibly after rains, leaving tiny castings like dark pearls on the surface. Clovers and legumes volunteered in greater numbers, their tiny purple and white blooms dotting the green, releasing a faint honeyed fragrance when crushed underfoot. After heavy thunderstorms, water no longer sheeted off in angry red rivulets carving gullies. Instead, it soaked in, leaving puddles that mirrored the sky rather than staining creeks downstream. The land whispered encouragement in these small ways, urging him onward. By the mid-2000s, polyculture took root in earnest. Poultry arrived in waves around 2005-2006. Freedom Ranger broilers are hardy, slower-growing cross far from industrial hybrids housed in mobile coops that rolled behind cattle herds. Their sharp, inquisitive clucks and the rapid flutter of wings filled the midday air like living static. Chickens scratched vigorously at the ground, stirring up insects with dusty puffs. Their droppings rich, dark, a nitrogen pack scattered in even patterns that greened regrowth almost visibly. The scent around the coops blended fresh feathers with the tangy sharpness of fresh poultry manure, alive and fermenting into soil rather than pooling in lagoons. Sheep and goats joined next, their soft bleats and tinkling bells a gentle counterpoint to the deeper bovine rumbles. Katahdin sheep and boar goats browsed weeds cattle overlooked thorny blackberry vines. Tough brooms sedged their nimble hooves trampling residue into mulch. In wooded edges, heritage pigs Iberico and Berkshire crosses rooted with enthusiastic grunts and snuffles, turning leaf litter and acorns into dark, fertile loam. Their earthy musk mingled with pine resin and damp underbrush, a rich woodland perfume that drifted on evening breezes. The farm evolved into a moving symphony, cattle leading the procession, trampling tall grasses and depositing manure in generous patties. Poultry following to peck larvae and spread nutrients with busy feet, small ruminants cleaning up fibrous leftovers. Pigs churning shaded spots into compost-ready earth. No waste, lingered everything cycled back under sun and rain. The air hummed with life, insect buzzes drawn to diverse forages. Bird calls as flocks shadowed the herds, the soft thud of hooves on resilient turf. Scaling required bold leaps, For decades, animals endured long hauls to off-farm process as cattle crammed into trucks for 3-hour journeys. Arriving stressed, hides matted with sweat and filth, the metallic fear scent sharp in confined trailers. The thought haunted Will. In 2007, he borrowed $7.5 million against the land to construct an on-farm red meat abattoir, opening in 2008. Guided by Temple Grandin's humane designs, animals walked calm. Shaded paths from pasture to facility, no ramps, onto cold concrete until the final step. The building's interior carried the clean, metallic tang of processing, but without the terror-saturated panic of distant plants. A separate poultry facility followed in 2010. Equally thoughtful birds moved gently. The air, inside warm with feathers and the faint, savory aroma of fresh harvest rather than distress. The debt felt crushing amid thin margins, but vertical integration unlocked possibilities. Full control from birth to plate-ensured welfare and quality. Meat developed richer, mineral-forward flavors from true grass finishing deep. Beefy notes with subtle grass sweetness, unlike the bland uniformity of grain-fed commodity cuts. Direct sales grew, grass-fed beef, and lamb landed in Publix and Whole Foods chains. Premium poultry reached Atlanta restaurants 3 hours away. Online orders shipped nationwide. The farm's brand solidified White Oak Pastures. Transparent, ethical, flavorful. Sensory immersion deepened. Dawn choruses layered richly, roosters crowing piercingly against soft cattle lowing, geese honking overhead in formation, the rustle of thousands of chicken feet on dew-wet grass. Midday pastures buzzed with insects and bird life. Evenings brought the warm, fermented sweetness of on-farm composting piles where animal byproducts returned to earth. Soil darkened visibly tests later confirmed organic matter rising tenfold compared to neighboring conventional fields. From 0.5% to over 5%, sometimes nearing 10% in long-managed areas. A handful scooped from any pasture felt friendly, almost edible, crumbly, dark, rich with the loamy, mushroomy scent of living earth that begged to be inhaled deeply. Recognition arrived gradually. In 2011, Georgia's Governor's Award for Environmental Stewardship. In 2015, praise from the Savory Institute. The defining moment came in 2017 with the Quanti's Life Cycle Assessment, commissioned by General Mills via their Epic Provisions brand. Scientists sampled soils across Chronosequence's fields, regenerated 0 to 20 years measuring carbon sequestration against emissions. Findings astonished. White Oak Pastures offset more than it emitted. Each pound of beef protein absorbed net carbon around 3.5 pounds CO2 equivalent in models, with the farm functioning as a true carbon sink, reducing overall footprint by 85 to 111% when soil sequestration was fully accounted for. Enteric methane from ruminants persisted, but proved short-lived compared to avoided fossil fuel inputs in conventional systems. Economically, the tide turned. Diversified revenue, direct sales, e-commerce, value-added lines like tallow soaps scented with herbs, leather goods from hides, pet chew stabilized the operation. By the 2020s, over 165 employees made the farm the county's largest employer. Breathing life back into Bluffton, a bustling general store with the aroma of fresh coffee and cured meats. And on-site, restaurant serving pasture chew-plate meals rich with grilled steaks and herb-roasted poultry. Cozy cabins for agritourism visitors who woke to animal sounds and star-filled skies. Challenges endured weather extremes, battering fragile new ecosystems. Razor-thin margins in regenerative models. The constant labor of managing multi-species rotations, yet will frame them as integral to the path. We spent over 25 years figuring out how to exit the industrial model, he reflected in interviews and writings. The farm demonstrated proof. Nutrient-dense food produced alongside land healing. Animal dignity honored. Communities revived, all while drawing down atmospheric carbon. Through every season, The red clay of southwest Georgia breathed anew, soft and alive under boots, teeming with worms and roots, carrying the layered sense of renewal, fresh forage after rain. Warm manure integrated into soil, the clean vitality of a system in balance. White oak pastures had not merely survived the crucible of transition. It had emerged transformed, a living testament to what redemption looks and feels like when one man dares to listen to the land. The transformation of white oak pastures from a farm in quiet crisis during the early 2000s to a vibrant, world-recognized model of regenerative agriculture unfolded not with dramatic fireworks, but through the steady accumulation of proof in the soil, in the animals, in the community, and in the growing chorus of voices that carried Will Harris's story far beyond the red clay hills of southwest Georgia. By the late 2010s and well into the 2020s, what had begun as one man's private reckoning had become a public inspiration, drawing seekers from across the globe to walk the same pastures where the air now thrummed with life rather than hummed with machinery. Recognition came in waves, each one building on the last like layers of organic matter accumulating in the soil. In 2011, the Governor's Award for Environmental Stewardship arrived, a heavy plaque presented in an Atlanta hall where the air smelled of polished oak and fresh coffee. The kind of formal space that felt worlds away from the farm's dusty lanes. Will stood there in his usual chambray shirt and scuffed boots, the award cool against his palms, while the citation spoke of restored watersheds, halted erosion, and the return of birds whose songs once again filled the mornings. Soon after, visitors multiplied, researchers in field vests clutching soil probes, policymakers wiping sweat from brows under the relentless Georgia sun, everyday eaters who had driven hours simply to breathe the farm's air now, rich with the sweet ferment of diverse forages. The warm musk of sun-warmed cattle hides, the sharp, lively chatter of guinea fowl darting across paths like living confetti. By 2015, the Savory Institute had certified white oak pastures as a global hub for regenerative grazing, a designation that brought even more eyes to the farm's multi-species, rotations cattle trampling tall grasses into mulch, poultry scratching behind them in dusty flurries, goats browsing thorny edges with nimble precision, pigs rooting shaded underbrush into dark, fertile loam. The air during these movements carried a symphony of scents, the mineral tongue of disturbed soil, the fresh green burst of trampled clover, the faint honeyed perfume of blooming legumes fixing nitrogen naturally. The watershed moment arrived in 2017 with the Quanti's Life Cycle Assessment. Funded by General Mills through Epic Provisions, teams arrived with trucks laden with equipment, coring deep into chronosequence fields degraded cropland just converted, pastures 5 years along, 20-year veterans of regeneration. They pulled up cylinders of earth that smelled profoundly alive, dark, cool, mushroom-rich, threaded with fungal hyphae and wriggling earthworms. The findings stunned. White oak pastures sequestered more carbon than it emitted. Each pound of beef protein offset roughly 3.5 pounds of CO2 equivalent through soil storage. The farm as a whole functioned as a net sink, reducing its total footprint by up to 85 to 111% when sequestration was fully credited. Later peer-reviewed work in Frontiers in Sustainable Food Systems around 2022-2021 refined this further. Multi-species rotations slashed net greenhouse gas emissions by 80% in the grazing system compared to conventional baselines, yielding a 66% lower overall carbon footprint for beef, despite requiring 2.5 times more land per unit of output. Methane from ruminants persisted higher in forage systems, but its short atmospheric life made it far less damaging than avoided fossil fuel dependencies in industrial models. These numbers translated to sensory reality on the ground. Soil organic matter had climbed from skeletal fractions 0.5 to 1% to 5% or more, approaching 10% in the oldest pastures. A handful felt almost weightless yet substantial, crumbly, dark as rich chocolate, cool and slightly damp against the skin, exhaling that deep, loamy perfume of thriving microbial communities. After rains, water soaked in rather than sheeted off. Creeks ran clearer, carrying only the faint mineral whisper of healthy hydrology instead of the heavy silt load from neighboring fields. Visitors knelt to scoop soil, inhaling deeply, often remarking how it smelled like life itself, fertile, fungal, faintly sweet. Media amplified the story. Forbes dubbed with a cowboy carbon farmer. The New York Times ran features with dawn photographs, golden light spilling over mist-shrouded pastures. Cattlebacks, glowing, will silhouette against the horizon as he walked with coffee steaming in hand. NPR broadcasts carried his measured Georgia drawl into kitchens nationwide. Podcasts invited him again and again. Interviews, he deflected grandeur. I'm no pioneer. I just stopped fighting nature and let her teach me. The faint background sounds wind rustling pines, distant lowing. The soft thud of hooves made listeners feel the farm's pulse through speakers. Awards layered on. The EcoAg Achievement Award from Acres USA in a barn-scented hall filled with denim-clad farmers. Georgia's small business rock star recognition. The highest honors from regenerative circles. By 2025, we'll receive the EcoAg Achievement Award once more. The organization's pinnacle tribute. Presented amid the scent of hay bales and wood smoke at a conference where attendees swapped stories late into the night. The farm's human footprint grew equally profound. By the mid-2020s, White Oak Pastures employed around 170 to 180 people, the largest private employer in Early County. Jobs spanned the spectrum. Pasture managers, rising to roosters piercing crows and the warm, earthy musk of cattle at first light. Butchers in abattoirs, where the air held the clean metallic tongue of humane harvest. Packers in warehouses scented with cardboard and cured meats. Cooks in the on-site restaurant grilling ribeyes until fat sizzled and aromas of seared. Mineral-rich beef wafted through open windows. Bluffton revived, once a near-ghost town of empty porches and dust devils. Now, alive with the farm's general store coffee brewing strong, bacon frying crisp. Herbal tallow soaps, adding faint lavender, and rosemary notes sound the restaurant serving pasture chew-plate feasts. Crisp-skinned roasted chicken juicy with forage-fed flavor. Greens bright with vinaigrette and subtle bitterness. Sides of seasonal vegetables still carrying the sun's warmth. Agritourism flourished. To new lodging houses Pin Oak and Baroque opened in Bluffton by 2025. Ready for guests who woke to geese honking overhead, the rustle of poultry on duet grass, starlit skies giving way to golden dawn, cabins smelled of fresh pine and clean linens. Mornings brought coffee on porches overlooking pastures where over 100,000 hearts beat daily. Thousands of broilers in mobile coops, layers in tractors, 700 cattle herds, sheep and goats browsing, pigs rooting, rabbits, seasonal turkeys. In 2021, Will founded the Center for Agricultural Resilience CFAR, a nonprofit to educate thought leaders. 4-day immersions drew farmers, chefs, attorneys, planners. Participants walked shaded paths feeling resilient turf spring beneath boots. Smelled layered forages, sweet clover, tangy chicory. Mineral grasses watched herds move in symphony. Sessions covered resiliency versus efficiency, restarting nature's cycles, land monitoring, rural revival. In 2025, CFAR secured $1 million Australian grant to build a dedicated training facility in Bluffton, completion eyed for early 2026. Its future walls already imagined, scented with fresh-cut lumber and drying hay. Workshops expanded to solar grazing, where sheep now managed vegetation under solar arrays on partnered lands. Blending renewable energy with soil regeneration. Will's 2023 book, A Bold Return to Giving a Damn, 1 Farm, 6 Generations, and the Future of Food became a touchstone. The memoir manifesto traced the Harris lineage from 1866 through industrialization's excesses to his radical traditional pivot. Pages evoked the farm, crunch of hooves on turf, warm ferment of compost, clean vitality of instinctive animals. Lines like food, farms, and earth will be better if more people give a damn resonated. Readers journaled values, shared copies, formed discussion groups. A companion workbook emerged, guiding personal transformation through prompts on ethical choices and community impact. Thousands visited annually by the mid-2020s. Tours lasted an hour, groups beneath live oaks heavy with Spanish moss, hearing poultry clatter behind cattle, feeling warm goat breath on hands, tasting jerky, smoky and chewy, or eggs with yolks deep orange from true forage. Many departed with soil-stained fingers, carrying quiet possibility. At nearly 70, Will still rose pre-dawn. Coffee steamed as light gilded pastures. He walked among diverse species, grasped beef, lamb, goat, pastured pork, poultry varieties, rabbit, 60 organic vegetables on no-till sites, challenges persisting, weather extremes, thin margins, multi-species labor, yet he framed them as stewardship. Nature rewards diversity, complexity, patience. He'd say, wind carrying scents of fresh forage, warm manure, pine resin across breathing land. From contributor to depletion to restorer of vitality, Will Harris embodied redemption, not solitary heroism, but the power of listening deeply. White oak pastures proved land could heal, animals thrive with dignity, communities flourish, food nourish body and planet. In an era of uncertainty, his story offered enduring hope rooted in Georgia's red clay. Reaching outward to inspire, a world ready to give a damn. The story of Will Harris and White Oak Pastures does not end with awards, studies, or even the revival of Bluffton. It continues in the quiet, daily rhythms of a farm that has chosen to heal rather than exploit, to listen rather than command. As the Georgia sun rises over the red clay hills in early 2026, the air still carries the same layered symphony it did decades ago, only richer now. The sharp crow of roosters piercing the dawn mist, the low, contented rumble of cattle stirring from their night beds, the soft rustle of thousands of chicken feet on dew-wet grass, the distant honk of geese flying in formation overhead. The soil beneath Will's boots, once compacted and lifeless, feels spongy and alive, exhaling a deep, mushroomy loam scented with the faint sweet ferment of microbial life and the warm tang of integrated manure. Will, nearing 70, still rises before first light. Coffee steams in his hand as he walks the pastures, the golden glow of sunrise gilding the backs of grazing animals. Over 100,000 hearts beat across 3,200 acres, herds of grasped cattle moving in slow rotations. Broilers scratching behind them in mobile coops, layers in tractors laying eggs with yolks the deep orange of true forage. Sheep and goats browsing thorny edges, pigs rooting shaded underbrush into fertile dark earth. Rabbits hopping in fenced paddocks, seasonal turkeys swelling the numbers. And 60 varieties of organic vegetables growing on sites shifting toward no-till. The farm produces not just food but proof that land can mend, that animals can express their instincts with dignity, that rural communities can breathe again. In his 2025 year-end reflection, Will wrote in all caps, "Aziz his way." We will remember 2025 as a great year. For our farm, profitability remained modest, but the farm pressed forward. A massive remodel began on the on-farm poultry plant, expanding capacity to process pasture-raised hogs, sheep, and goats more efficiently, completion slated for early 2026, to new lodging houses, Pin Oak and Bur Oak, opened in Bluffton, welcoming more visitors who wake to animal sounds and star-filled skies, their porches scented with fresh pine and morning coffee. Agritourism grew steadily, drawing people eager to walk the resilient turf. Inhale the layered scents of diverse forages, sweet clover, tangy chicory, mineral-rich grasses, and witness multi-species harmony firsthand. The Center for Agricultural Resilience, CFAR, founded by Will in 2021, continued its mission to educate thought leaders on resilient ecosystems. In 2025, CFAR received a $1 million grant to construct a dedicated regenerative agriculture training facility in Bluffton. Set to open in 2026, workshops expanded fundamentals of agricultural resilience, immersive introductions to regenerative practices, and specialized sessions on solar grazing. Partnerships with Silicon Ranch Corporation brought sheep to nearly 2,400 acres of solar farms in southwest Georgia, where grazing keeps vegetation from shading panels while regenerating soil and sequestering carbon. White Oak Pastures now hosts multi-day solar grazing workshops, teaching ranchers nationwide how to integrate livestock with renewable energy field visits to varied solar designs, hands-on rotational moves with sheep herds, discussions on contracts and site challenges. These efforts reflect Will's core belief. Regenerative agriculture is not about scaling to industrial size, but about making resilience replicable across diverse contexts. Nature abhors the offenses. She rewards diversity, complexity, patience. The farm zero-waste system uses every part of the animal hides for leather, fats for tallow soap scented with herbs, bones for pet chews, offal composted back to soil. The on-farm abattoirs ensure humane ends. Animals walk calm paths to slaughter, the air carrying only the clean metallic tongue of processing rather than fear. The broader impact endures. Soil organic matter continues to rise. Water infiltration improves. Biodiversity returns songbirds, pollinators, earthworms thriving in numbers once absent. The 2017 Quaney's assessment and follow-up studies remain foundational. White Oak Pastures as a net carbon sink, offsetting more emissions than produced through soil sequestration. Partnerships and education spread these lessons. Farmers rethinking silos, communities revitalizing around vertically integrated food hubs, policymakers considering holistic metrics beyond yield. The companion workbook guides ethical choices, urging small steps toward larger change. Challenges persist. Weather extremes test new ecosystems. Margins stay thin in ethical models. Multi-species. Labor demands constant attention, yet Will frames them as integral to stewardship. At dawn, he walks among the animals, coffee in hand, listening to the land's quiet signals, the soft thud of hooves, the buzz of insects drawn to diverse forages, the wind carrying pine resin and fresh manure across breathing fields. This is not a tale of individual heroism. Will insists he is no pioneer, just a farmer who listened when the dirt spoke louder than textbooks or markets. From a fourth-generation cattleman trained in industrial methods to a steward who returned to radically traditional ways, his journey shows redemption is possible. Mistakes can be mended, land can forgive, systems can shift. White Oak Pastures stands as living evidence. Land heals when given cycles instead of chemicals. Animals thrive when allowed instinct. Communities revive when rooted in place, rather than extracted from it. Food becomes nourishment, not just calories, but connection to soil, seasons, and one another. As the sun climbs higher over Bluffton in 2026, the farm continues its work. Visitors arrive, workshops fill, solar sheep graze beneath panels, young farmers take notes. Will steps onto a rise, wind in his face, the red clay soft under boots. He looks out over pastures greening with promise, animals moving in harmony, the distant hum of life renewed. The story is unfinished, as all true stories are. In its ongoing chapter, each done walk, each workshop, each handful of living soil, it carries a message of hope. We can choose differently. We can repair what was broken. We can, if we give a damn, become part of the healing. And so the red clay of southwest Georgia keeps breathing, the animals keep moving, the land keeps teaching. White Oak Pastures endures not as a monument to one man, but as proof that change, rooted deep and tended patiently, can ripple outward to touch the world. Thank you for listening to this journey from the post-Civil War homestead of Captain James Edward Harris. Through generations of change and challenge, to Will Harris's bold return to giving a damn. May it inspire your own small steps toward a more resilient, more humane, more connected way of living on this earth.